Southern California's Maria Coffee fuels your body and your day by delivering coffee right to your door from mariacoffee.com. They hand package and ship fresh roasted coffee that they source from small farms from around the world. Inspired by the action sports stars, filmmakers, and artists that have taken a turn at the roaster, Maria Coffee delivers the inspiration and great coffee. Order now at mariacoffee.com. That's MAREA coffee.com. Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Coffee People podcast, which is part of the Roast West Coast Coffee Network. As always, presented by Roastery Coffee Packaging. If you are a small business roasting excellent coffee that you want showcased in an equally excellent package, perhaps an already designed holiday-specific package, you'll find what you're looking for at roastery.com. I'm Ryan Woldt, and this is the Coffee Podcast where we meet interesting people connected to the world of coffee. Today, we're chatting with Matthew Bryce. He's the founder and coffee educator behind 7 Sleepers Coffee Labs, which you can find on Instagram at SS Coffee Labs. Matthew and I met at Coffee Fest LA earlier this year and had a standing in the aisle conversation for like an hour in front of the Hasea Coffee Source booth. I was excited to get the opportunity to chat with him again for today's podcast. His company, 7 Sleepers Coffee Labs, offers customizable, personalized coffee education for individuals, couples, corporations, really groups of any size. If you're a fan of Roast West Coast and you've listened to our Coffee Smarter podcasts, then you know that they're like an app where you can get all the information you need. Matthew is offering up the context, the experience, the immersion that is needed to take the content and make it whole. And if Matthew ever gets out of the coffee game, I really hope he gets a job at NPR. His voice, his cadence, incredibly soothing, which I actually really need right now because I've just spent the morning dropping holiday Guess the Coffee Beans contest kits off at some great local coffee purveyors like Zumbar Coffee and Tea, Acento Coffee Roasters, Steady State Roasting, and Camp Coffee Company. And I figured, while I was there, I should, probably definitely get a cup of coffee. So yeah, I need a little soothing. We should get to it. Wherever you are, fill that coffee mug, slow play that espresso, get your latte order in, because it is time for this Coffee People podcast conversation with Matthew Bryce, founder of 7 Sleepers Coffee Labs in Southern California.
I've never done this before, so I don't really know what to expect.
We've had a conversation already. It's just like that.
Yeah.
Why don't we start with this? If you could tell everyone who is listening out in the world someday in the future what your name is and what your coffee company is.
Yeah. My name is Matthew Bryce, and my coffee company is 7 Sleepers Coffee Labs. I'm based out of Torrance, California.
Okay, and what does 7 Sleepers do? It's not a coffee shop, so what is it?
Correct, yeah. It's like consumer education, essentially.
We're going to get to a bunch of that stuff. I know a little bit more about it already because you and I met at Coffee Fest, but I want to learn more about you and share more about you. I'm wondering if you had any coffee experiences that you remember as being kind of seminal, kind of a first moment where you're like, oh, this is more than just something I do in the morning.
Yeah, I can think of 2. There was one, which was actually when I decided I wanted to work in coffee. I had worked in coffee shops prior, but it was always essentially, I need a job and, I have this cafe that will hire me and a friend of mine who knew I had worked at Starbucks in the 90s had, it's a long time ago, but
I feel like the reputation of Starbucks in the 90s was different than it is now. I mean, not the reputation, but perception.
yeah, they were perceived very much as leaders back then. They're I think trying to restore that now. But yeah, this was like 98, 99, and he was introducing me to the specialty coffee world and had a friend who was roasting out of Virginia Beach and had a coffee called I don't know if it's the same coffee. I don't think it is, but it was a natural coffee from Ethiopia called Misty Valley. On the bag it said Adido, and since then I've seen bags of coffee that say Idido, and I'm not sure if there's a difference. I haven't really investigated that, but Misty Valley I know was famous for a few years, and then it started disappearing. So I think it's different. But like I said, I couldn't tell you how. Anyways, it was great. He made me this really delicious French press cup of coffee, and to me, I as a student drinking coffee, you're used to the big pots of percolated coffee that you'd rather forget. You drink for utility, and this one was really fun. It was like a dessert, It made me think of the Kool-Aid Man, sort of like bursting through the wall. And so that was neat. And so for me, I was like, can I make all my coffee taste like this? Yes, you can.
Yes, let me direct you to the rabbit hole over here.
Exactly. Yeah. Right this way. It's called the Linea 2 group. So yeah, it was really fun. And then a few years later, actually quite some time later, I was visiting a Blue Bottle in Chelsea, and they were brewing a natural Costa Rican on a flannel dripper. It was the little Nell dripper. I think you can still get them. I think Bodum maybe makes them, or Hario or somebody. I think they still have this recipe, or they did for a while up on their website. It was awesome. It was like 1-6 or something like weird like that. So you ended up with this like itty bitty little like concentrated thing of coffee. It kind of reminded me of like a hot Amaro, which is like wild. It's got all those like very like pungent fruity flavors, lots of like herbal flavors. But for me, I was just like, what's happening right now? This isn't, my typical, filtered or, French press cup of coffee. And it was great. The barista was really knowledgeable too. So we talked for a little while. I don't remember his name, but he was very nice. Thank you.
He's probably listening. If he's out there, reach into
Yeah.
the show. So you went next door, you started a company, and you started teaching coffee, right? That's how fast that happened?
Yep, exactly.
What were you doing before Seven Sleepers, before this coffee education track you're on now? You discovered coffee, but you have a life. What is it that you're doing?
Yeah, well, I was in coffee, and I couldn't stay in coffee because it was actually pretty rare back when I first got into it. There weren't coffee shops everywhere like there are now. I think the next closest coffee shop to where I worked was probably about 75, 80 miles away. It was a
Oh, wow.
drive. And, it was in DC. It was the one that comes to mind is Murky, which was Nick Cho's coffee shop back then. I would visit and, of course, learn lots and lots and lots of things. And that was always really wonderful. But yeah, I couldn't stay in coffee. I ended up taking jobs in, retail because I was going back and forth from school. So it was a lot of summer jobs. And then eventually I got into B2B sales. I got sick as well, like bad sick. I don't know how to describe it, like for people listening, but I couldn't continue to work and spent the next couple years trying to find a diagnosis. And in the meantime, was like getting some help from people who knew a lot about my symptoms and how to help me control them. And so I spent that time trying to adjust my diet, and I couldn't be active, but I was able to sort of get around. And eventually, this is going to sound weird. When I was able to walk again, like I was like, hey, I should get a job. And I really miss coffee. So by that point, coffee had kind of begun to become a little bit more ubiquitous. There was like 2 coffee shops in my town. I was able to go and apply there. And then I really wanted to go back out towards DC and work for the coffee companies out there so that I could learn more and not just rest on, what I had learned from my previous experience with the Kool-Aid coffee. And yeah, it was kind of history from there. It's just a lot of visiting cafes, tasting a lot of great shots from great baristas, and making a lot of funny faces, while I, a few things I wasn't expecting. And eventually had begun to sort of perfect things on my own. And I know this is long-winded, forgive me, but yeah, once I had started to go through that process, and I was making coffee at home, like for friends, and like hosting people, like they would come over and just for coffee. So there's lots of pictures of me on MySpace, like making coffee for people.
I'll explain to everyone what MySpace is at the end of the show. Just stay tuned.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, eventually I was doing a lot more reading and making suggestions to the people I was working with, and my bosses caught wind of it and gave me a job as a trainer. And that was kind of where it started for me, was becoming a trainer in the cafe I was working at in DC. Because from there I was in various training roles up until the point that I had stepped out from the bar and started working with consumers.
It's really interesting, I think, just the coffee industry in general. So many of the stories that I hear, and this is just me on an exposition rant here, their career is almost a byproduct of this desire to learn about something. They got caught up in this coffee thing, probably thought they'd get a job somewhere else someday, and then years go by and decades go by, and depending on who you are, and you never stop learning, really. Even when you're the teacher, you're still learning because coffee is continually evolving, and that is such a cool thing that I find. Most of your story so far is taking place on the East Coast, but you are now on the West Coast.
Yeah.
How did that happen, and was that part of the inspiration for starting your own education company?
Yes. Uh, Wait a minute. So while I was living in DC, I met my wife. We were friends for a really long time, and actually, just I probably in the last couple of years I was there, we decided we wanted to get married. We didn't really like date a bunch, we'd been friends long enough. We're like, hey, this is us. So a little bit of an unusual path, I imagine, for some folks, but yeah, we started planning, and she's from LA, and I'm originally from the West Coast. I was born here, but I spent all my time growing up on the East Coast, so I'm not used to LA at all. She was finishing up school. She was studying to become an attorney, and I was working, and I was studying at the time as well. I was thinking about, I didn't end up doing it, but I was thinking about pursuing a master's in sacred musicology, and that was really cool. But I don't know, maybe that'll come later.
Before you go too much further, what is that? What is sacred musicology? I've never heard of that term.
Oh, so musicology is, it's sort of a historical pursuit. You kind of learn about like the development and like usage of music in like maybe a particular region or time. For me, it was sacred music. So the emphasis was on early church music, which was wild because early on there were you're gonna get me talking about this. There were a lot of divisions in terms of like how music could be applied within the Christian sphere, which is where my focus was.
That's a really wild thought. I never would have considered that at some point it feels like hymns and church music has just always existed.
Yeah,
I'm sure at some point there was somebody who was writing just out of passion, but I bet there was a conversation about the political nature of, is singing something we want to include? Is music something we want to include?
yeah.
I'm going to go down a rabbit hole after the show. The Coffee People podcast is presented by Roastar Coffee Packaging. Roastar is a digital printing company that makes custom printed packaging for coffee products. They work with small, mid, and large coffee roasters nationwide. Go to roastery.com to learn more about their fast turnaround times, high-quality packaging products, sustainability efforts, and low printing minimums, which enable your small business to tell a really big story. If you are ready to upgrade those coffee bags, go to roastery.com. So you were going to do that, but you didn't. Your wife, your future wife, is from LA.
Yes.
That's where we pick up.
Yes. She was finishing school and looking for work in DC. And DC is a great spot, for aspiring attorneys. She had some leads on some jobs, but nothing was really developing for her. And at my job as well, I didn't have a lot of development going on for me. I didn't see a lot of future where I was. So we thought, well, maybe we could move on making our way to the West Coast and trying our luck there. I applied for a West Coast roaster called Clatch Coffee, and I had visited them once before and was really impressed by their baristas' knowledge, and their coffee was really delicious. And so I applied and got a job working in the beach cities over at their Redondo store that was just opening. That was back in 2018. And as soon as she finished with her classes, my wife moved out here and started studying for the bar exam while we planned a wedding. So it worked. we made our way out here. She passed the bar. We got married. We started having kids right away. And I was working at Clatch. Since then, I've worked for two other cafes. I worked for Rose Park Roasters in Long Beach, and then Corridor Flow in Lomita. And right after Corridor Flow, actually during my time at Corridor Flow is kind of when the thought, of like how to push harder into the outreach portion of my job, sort of turned into this idea for Seven Sleepers.
Well, why don't you explain for us what the concept of Seven Sleepers is? In my notes, I have that it's kind of in-home and professional coffee training, but what does that mean? I mean, if I'm somebody Googling around trying to learn more about coffee, I stumble across Seven Sleepers on Instagram, or SS Coffee Labs, I believe is your Instagram.
Right.
What does that mean? What does a session with you look like? What is your goal with this company?
Well, the goal was to distill a lot of the hard work of the people in the supply chain so that the consumer who's buying coffee in their favorite cafe or maybe off the shelf at their grocery store can take advantage of it all. A lot of us buy a cup of coffee or buy a cup of coffee wherever we are. And, if it's good, we're like, oh man, what was this? And, you go back, you ask the barista, and if you really liked it, you'll buy a bag, right? You buy a bag, you'll take it home and you'll brew it up and you get all excited. And if you don't really know what you're doing, it's not going to be the experience. There might be similarities, but for the most part, it's a disappointment. And that's where I wanted to help sort of distill all that work, because if anybody's, ever been to a coffee farm and seen all of the hard work that goes, a tree takes 5 years, to grow before, producing fruit. Oh my gosh, 5 years of, constant care and attention. And, you can't do it with just a few trees. You got to have a farm. And then you got to think about how that farm's going to be situated, what your weather's like, what your people are going to need in order to, produce these things. And then depending on where you are, maybe there's gangs that want to take advantage of your farm, and steal your assets. You don't want any of that. So it could be a whole ordeal. And then, finally somebody from either within or from outside the country comes and, is interested in your product, and you have to try and sell it to them. And so you're trying your best to pick, the best cherries possible. And there's a whole novel that could be written, several volumes of novels that could be written about all the steps that go into this. And then, we take it and we bring it home and we're like, oh no, this sucks. The best part is it doesn't suck. And
no, what you're saying is that I suck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the best part of that is that you can learn, right?
Right. There's room for improvement.
And if you've taken the coffee home already and you've maybe put it in a machine, or you've bought a grinder, then you've already taken steps towards making the best use of all of this care and attention, which is like found its way to you. And so that's kind of where I am. Like I've been in coffee a long time. I really want people to love coffee. I don't think it's difficult, right? We go to coffee shops all the time. The difficult part then is participating in that process of hospitality and of like producing something that shows all of the care and attention that it's always been shown, from seed to cup. And so, when we're making coffee for our friends or for our family, we want to give it that same care and attention, but we don't know how, and there's a gap there. And so that's where Seven Sleepers comes in, is to offer the resources and the education necessary to bridge that gap.
And just so I want to make it clear for people listening, you're essentially putting on private education classes for individuals or groups, but also like corporate businesses that are doing team building. I mean, I just want to make sure I have it right too, because
Yeah.
I don't want a bunch of people to reach out to you and then you're like, nah, I don't do that.
No, I mean, I have resources. Thankfully, there have been people who have been very kind to me and provided me with resources to get started. This is a new company. We just started this year, but I'm able to travel. I'm able to, bring equipment and to teach people. Ideally, I teach people in their homes on their own equipment so they learn how to use it well. But for, like maybe a corporate event or for like a tasting or something like that, I can, provide those things. I also have been able to, in my time here, just get to know some really talented roasters and people who are putting a lot of hard work into producing really tasty coffees. And so I work with them to, provide maybe something you haven't tried before. And I'm also trying to work with like local cafes. I've reached out to a number of cafes here in the South Bay and beyond. And but we're still getting started, so things are still kind of picking up. And it's a process, but it's been fun. I've learned a lot, that's for sure. And I suspect I'll continue to learn a lot.
Well, the challenge that you described, the bringing home coffee from a coffee roaster and being disappointed, is one I am intimately familiar with. And it's one of the reasons why I do this show. And it's one of the reasons why I got into coffee in the first place, because I couldn't replicate that coffee at home. And I still wanted to support, it was important to me to support local businesses and local coffee roasters, because I come from a family of local restaurant owners and local business owners. And so I found value in what they were providing, but I couldn't justify what I was doing with the product to keep spending the money on it, other than to just be supportive. And that didn't seem like the right path. Like I wanted to actually enjoy it. I didn't want to like just give the money away and then not enjoy it selfishly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not in a position where I can just give the money away. It doesn't work.
Right. None
It
of us
doesn't work
really.
that way. So that's exactly the reason why. And I happen to be in a position where I was able to ask somebody from the industry like you to teach me. And instead of just letting me pay them a little bit to teach me something, they made me work for them for a year. Chris, I know you're listening, and I'm talking about you. But, I was lucky that I was able to do that. And because of my career, I was working in the restaurant industry. I was able to go down into that world and really dig into it for work. But if I hadn't had that, I certainly would have appreciated the ability to go to a class or to meet with someone to say, hey, what am I doing here? And I'm always amazed when it's like a few little tweaks here and there can exponentially improve the experience. So I think it's a great concept. What about the name Seven Sleepers? It's kind of an interesting name. Where does that come from?
It comes from a folk tale, which is popularized sort of out of like Greece. Another name is the Seven Sleepers of Ephesus. There's actually a feast day for them on the Christian calendar. There's also talk of them in the Quran. I'm sorry to anybody listening, I don't know the reference, but you do. Essentially, it's about these youth who are trying to flee persecution, and they do so by running into the wilderness, and they hide in a cave, and they all fall asleep. And they fall asleep for 6 years. And no, forgive me, everyone's pulling their hair out because I said 6 years. It's closer to like 300 years. But I think there was like 6 kids. I'm getting it confused. Anyways, they awake to find that their persecutors are gone and that the world has actually been, I guess, for their perspective, turned right side up, which would be upside down, for their
Right.
persecutors. And there's plenty of application or things that you could read into it. But for me, I just thought it would be sort of like a clever quip, because they fell asleep for a long time, and they're from a region where there's lots of coffee, and coffee actually has found its not necessarily its birthplace in terms of its taxonomy, but birthplace in terms of its enjoyment as a beverage there. There in Ethiopia and Egypt, and so I was like, oh, they woke up, they got their cup of coffee, and they were good to go. So I'm on my second cup for the morning, so I can totally read that into the story and feel right at home.
I'm actually onto decaf today already. It's early, but I started early. You mentioned that you and your wife started having kids right away. How do you balance, being a family, being a dad, and running your own business? You mentioned there's some travel involved, and even getting kind of the team on board with this idea that I'm gonna start my own business, and trust me, it's gonna work.
Yeah. Well, my wife was really encouraging. I don't always have the I'm old. I don't I'm old. And I think in some ways that makes me set in a lot of my ways, and that can be difficult for me, especially when coming into a new market like the California coffee market, and coming into new ways of doing things. For example, I've noticed there are like lots and lots and lots of brewers out there, like coffee brewers out there. And I'm like, why? Like essentially, I like 100 brewers that do the exact same thing or have the exact same, philosophy to them in terms of extraction. And I'm like, I get it. It's the free market. It's going to do its thing, go market. But I'm like, hey, let's keep it simple. That way we can learn and we can grow together. But sometimes there could be distraction, and I think that makes it difficult for me to stay employed in coffee shops, where it's just like, hey, I want to go do this thing, and I'm like, you don't need to do that, and they're like, no, we want to do that thing, and so it creates friction for me, and it's fine. People can move past little things like that. I think that's what we all experience at all of our jobs at some point. Moving past our little friction points. But for me, it really kind of like lit a fire, and made me want to do it my way, and of course that doesn't mean that, you just spread your wings and fly. It means you have now, instead of pushing against other ideas, you have to push against, the whole world and sort of the weight of how things work and the weight of, just like your life and how things come together. You mentioned, we started having kids right away. My wife is very encouraging, but my kids need me, so I don't have the time to necessarily go out every day and just brainstorm or have meetings or go and teach people. A lot of times I'm at home, and I'm with them, and I have to take little snippets of time that I have to write things down or to do some work or to just carve time out to do my job. When we started doing this, I was, a stay-at-home dad, and I was, full time with them. And that really hasn't changed. I'm a stay-at-home dad full time, and now I have a part-time job, that is this that I turn into a full-time job. So I think a lot of grace and a lot of effort, for everyone involved, has really produced, some good things.
You are working as an educator. What does teaching provide you? Is that just a means to an end that you get to keep learning, or is there some connection you feel with being able to pass on all the things that you've learned?
That's a cool question. So when I first got into coffee, yeah, I was very focused on the coffee and like very focused on sort of the extraction element of the coffee and trying to make sure that the coffees I was working with were pulling out all the things that I wanted them to so that they would taste good and be desirable. And that's still a focus, but it's not the focus anymore. The focus ended up shifting from the coffee to the encounter, with the individual on the other side of, the bar, and trying to bring more than just the cup of coffee to their day, whether it's just offering good service, or if you're able to, good hospitality, then it's just, being present and stepping into what potentially can become relationships. So for me, that was really what I wanted to hold on to. And thankfully, having this coffee education for me provided me a way to do that. And I think that's what coffee does really for all of us. My job really hasn't changed. I just took the bar out of the equation, or I brought the bar to you.
Mm-hmm.
However you want to look at it. The idea was still to have this time that's face to face with somebody and watch the elements that we're given, which are like the coffee beans and the water, turn into this thing, which not only bring us this meeting place, but also bring us enjoyment. And it might be sensory enjoyment, but it's also, the spiritual enjoyment of the presence of being, with someone else and getting to know them as people, and, learning how to, continue that hospitality and friendship.
It's a really interesting perspective that's what coffee does. The question I had written down, but it's kind of like, what advice could you offer someone? But I don't think that's the right question. I do wonder if people can choose, and you might have an opinion on this, whether or not that they choose to get into coffee. I wonder if you can say to yourself, I want to learn about coffee today. Or if it just sort of happens. I don't know anyone who's just like woke up one day and was like, I'm going to learn something new. What should I
Yeah.
pick? Coffee.
Yeah.
It just sort of feels like all of a sudden you're part of a community and you want to be able to either get more or contribute more, or both.
Right. Yeah.
To that environment.
Right. Well, what's the adage? Practice makes perfect.
In my case, practice creates sloth.
Oh no.
I start practicing and then I'm just like, I'll just practice forever. I won't move on to the next step. So I need to get away from that. So that's my challenge every day, is to get away from that. Even this coffee I'm drinking, it's fine, but it could be a lot better. I know that it could be better because I've brewed it a bunch of different times in different ways, but I chose this way because it was the laziest. And
sometimes there's coffee for utility and sometimes there's coffee for enjoyment. And I think they both have their value points.
I hope so. I read somewhere, I think on a post, that the Clever Dripper is your favorite of the brewers, the coffee brewers. I'm wondering why.
The Clever Dripper, I just like it. I don't know. Every time I make coffee in a Clever Dripper, it might not always be the best coffee, or the best expression of the coffee that I'm working with, but I think it has to do with just how I was introduced to it. To me, it was sort of an expression of, what's the word I'm looking for? I didn't finish my cup, so my words aren't coming quite yet. But there was a lot of opportunity in that style of brewing, because you can brew it as a normal coffee dripper with like a hole in the bottom. If you just leave it on your cup and you just pour your water, or you can do it as an immersion brewer, or you can, if you do it as an immersion brewer, it's still filtered, but
it's a nice hybrid. That's an interesting, the versatility of the dripper is a nice component.
The versatility and the hybridity of it, I think, were attractive to me very early on. And every time I'd brew on it, regardless of whether or not it was the best cup that I would produce, it would always be the sweetest cup that I would produce. And for me, like, I like sweet, so I'm just like,
Before we kind of come to a close here, I'm wondering how are you engaging with customers? You mentioned you reached out to some local shops, but how can people engage with you? How can they say, hey, I want to learn more. I heard this guy on the podcast. Then what?
Yeah, I have an Instagram that I'm currently using as my like online contact. I'm going to open up a few other like opportunities. They're not ready at all right now, but Instagram's the best way. I think my email is on there as well, and my phone contact is on there. Let's see, LinkedIn, you can find me. Although I think it's still under my name and it just says owner of 7 Sleepers.
Well, we'll send people to the Instagram. We'll say, hey, if you're out there listening and you want to get some one-on-one, one-on-five, some sort of focused coffee education, this is how you find Matthew. Anything we didn't kind of cover today that you want people to know about your coffee effort, about you, about what your hopes and dreams are for this company?
As much as it's, for the consumer, I think it's also for, the cafes, because I think we talked about this at Coffee Fest. Most cafes are still sort of limping from COVID and haven't really recovered. And, I want people to go in and visit cafes, that they enjoy, and I want them to buy beans from there, and I want them to have dates there, and good meetings, and work hard, and to tip their baristas and all these things. I want that to continue to grow and to recover as much as possible. And if something needs to change, then I would love to see fruit from change as well. But I think that fruit aspect needs to happen. And that's why I offer, not just to the consumer side, but also to cafes and to corporate businesses and things like this. Because, however it works, I just want it to work. I think it grows, my community, my neighborhood. It makes this a safer place. It makes this a better place. It uplifts everybody who's involved. That's how I see Seven Sleepers contributing.
Very cool. When you do stop at one of these cafes that you might provide education to or for their customers someday, what do you order for yourself?
If I've never been there, I always said that my go-to is espresso. Although I will sometimes, if I've heard a lot of really good things about them, then I'll kind of test them a little bit, and I'll order decaf. I'll be like, if you make good decaf, like everything else is going to be fine. I'm not worried. But otherwise, yeah, I'm a espresso and black coffee guy.
All right. I have one last question that just occurred to me. It has nothing to do with coffee. I would like to say, one, talking to you, I think makes me talk in a more radio-friendly voice because you just have that natural NPR vibe.
Oh, okay.
I know you have kids. What is your least favorite kids television show?
Oh, well, they don't watch TV.
Perfect answer. Matthew, I really appreciate you taking a half hour out of your day. I know you got a lot going on to chat with us, share your story. I've had a chance to talk to you twice now, and I'll just say that I feel like I've come away learning things both times. So I can't imagine you're not pretty good at what you're doing. I appreciate it.
The feeling is mutual. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, some key takeaways from the podcast today. Matthew remembers the very first coffee that changed his perception on the drink. I'm always surprised that we can have such specific moments that we as humans can identify as the moment of change. I'm surprised, despite being one of those people who loves telling and retelling the story of his first cup of coffee. In fact, I just mentioned it last week in the episode with Jared Linsmeyer, so go listen to that if you want to hear it again. For Matthew, his journey down the rabbit hole was the question, can I make all my coffees taste like this? His new career path is essentially a byproduct of wanting to continue learning about coffee and sharing his knowledge with all of us, so that we may get as much joy out of it as he does. Our younger listeners might not remember this, but Matthew referenced something called MySpace in our chat. MySpace was the social media in the early years of mass internet access. For a time, it burned bright, and an entire generation learned the basics of computer coding while trying to customize their profile pages. I think Justin Timberlake owns it now. Matthew had an early start in the coffee shops, but moved into retail for a long time. It was his impending marriage and a move to the West Coast that afforded him the opportunity to reset and get back in the coffee game. He worked for several coffee shops in the LA area, including Klatch in Redondo Beach, Rose Park Roasters in Long Beach, and Corridor Flow in Loma Linda. His passion to share his style and to try to do things in a way that combined the best of his experiences is what pushed thoughts of outreach into the forefront of his mind. As an entrepreneur, I can relate to that desire to put your own spin on things. His experiences lit a fire under him to start his own business, Seven Sleepers Coffee Labs, while still being a stay-at-home dad. The Seven Sleepers of Ephesus is a real story. It pops up in various religions, histories, and cultures. There are even several real-world caves that claim to be the cave that those youngsters slept in. It's a fun story, and I'll link to it on roastwestcoast.com. Finally, Matthew's focus on coffee, while behind the coffee bar, turned from solely on the quality of the extraction and getting the results he wanted in the cup, to creating an interaction with those of us on the other side placing our orders. Now that he has his own coffee education business, he's been able to keep that key experiential component in place, while continuing down his own coffee journey, just without the coffee shop bar itself, and with the rather fun challenge of bringing the bar to us, all with the aim of helping guide our own coffee explorations. That's all for this chat with Matthew Bryce of Seven Sleepers. I'll link to SS Coffee Labs on Instagram in this podcast notes and on roastwestcoast.com, which is where the newsletter that accompanies this podcast lives. There's so much coffee content there, and it's always changing, so be sure to check it out, roastwestcoast.com. It's also where you'll learn more about the following rapid-fire facts. 1. Industry partner Crossings Coffee is going to be retiring their popular Huehue Tenango coffee from Guatemala. Order it on crossingscoffee.com while you can. 2. Roast West Coast is a new member of the Podcast Academy, and we've submitted this show for possible indie podcasting awards at next year's Ambies. That's kind of cool, I think. 3. If you leave us a review on Spotify or give us some stars on Apple Podcasts, it really helps us out with those freaking algorithms that recommend this podcast to other podcast listeners. 4. Shout out to Jessica Bradford, who sent me the news that Spill the Beans, a San Diego area coffee and bagel shop, is opening a new location, their third, this one in Mission Valley. I love hearing stories of local coffee shops succeeding. Don't hesitate to send those to me. Contact info in the show notes. I'll link to the details on that opening for our San Diego listeners on roastwestcoast.com. And fifthly, that's hard to say. Don't forget to stop by Zoombar Coffee and Tea, Steady State Coffee Roasting, Camp Coffee Company, and or Acento Coffee Roasters if you're in the San Diego area, to guess how many coffee beans are in the jar. The winners will receive $50 gift cards or coffee and merch to the aforementioned coffee shops, courtesy of this podcast. The contest runs through December 14th, so you have some time to get there, and if you win, you'll be able to save your holiday money for that new coffee brewer. Thanks to all of the rest of our great industry partners, including Roastar Coffee Packaging, an excellent coffee packaging company that tells the big stories of small business coffee roasters. Learn more about their packaging options at roastar.com. And Ignite Coffee Company, Maria Coffee, Cape Horn Coffee Importers, Mostra Coffee Company, San Franciscan Roaster Company, Crossings Coffee, Civets Roasting Machines, First Light Coffee Whiskey, Hasea Coffee Source, Coffee Cycle Roasting, and Ascend Coffee Roasters. That's all for today. This show is part of the Roast West Coast Coffee Network, and this episode has been written, produced, and recorded by me, Ryan Woldt. Can you tell I've had several coffees? Always tip your baristas and be sure to drink good coffee. Hello? Are you still there? I know the truck out back is. This show is over, but since you're here, have you heard of Taylor Swift? I'm listening to her musical collaboration with the Desner Brothers of The National while drinking coffee today. It's a perfect compliment on a cool, cloudy California fall morning. I'll link to my coffee listening playlist on Spotify on roastwestcoast.com. Check it out. Hey out there, thanks for listening. Did you know this podcast is a listener and reader-supported, creative effort? Some amazing listeners and readers have chosen paid subscriptions to the Roast West Coast Coffee newsletter, on roastwestcoast.com. Those awesome people are part of a growing community who appreciate craft coffee, learning about coffee, and being inspired by the guests on this show. If you are able and this show has been going really well with your morning mug of your favorite coffee, please subscribe to the paid newsletter at roastwestcoast.com. Thanks for listening, thanks for subscribing, and thanks for drinking good coffee.